everybody, and thank you for joining me. I have milled 510 grams of hard wheat. I'm using hard white wheat today, but you could use red if you wanted, and it'll work out great. We're just gonna make very basic bread dough. And the reason I want to film this video with just the flour, water, salt, and yeast is because I want you to see what the results of just making a bread like you would with refined flour will turn out. And so if you can see this and make this, feel the dough, then you have a great idea of what you're looking for as you start to make changes to that dough later on. All right, so I have 510 grams of flour in this bowl, and I'm gonna use my scale. If you need a post on that, I do have it. We're gonna put the bowl on the scale and press the power button, and that's going to zero out the scale. It says 0 grams. Okay, we're gonna use 325 grams of water. And when pouring water for the scale, you wanna go slow the closer you get. I am using cold water. I have 335 grams. I over poured. That's okay. An extra 10 grams isn't gonna hurt you at all. Why would I use cold water? This goes back to what type of mixer you're using. And some people are using an Angstrom, a Bosch, the Artiste, the Nutrimill Artiste. Those are all mixers with the motor on the bottom. And what I noticed is that in the winter, when it was nice and cold, I made great bread. And then in the summer, I wondered why the bread was all of a sudden falling apart. And it had a lot to do with the dough was being overheated. So that heat from the motor is going to travel up into the bowl and into your bread. And if the dough gets too hot, it's going to start to break down the gluten. And then instead of having a tough dough, like when we first mixed this, it's actually going to just fall apart. You won't have any structure. It might even turn into a soupy mess depending on how long you mix it. Michelle, thank you for joining me. And just a note as well, like I love all the people who do the recipes and are helping people with that, but that's not me. And found that as I had other people helping and doing things in the group and sharing all the different things, I felt pressure to do and be like other people and not to be myself, and to share what it is that I do in this kitchen. That is the point of this group, is to share with you what I do and how I do it, because for me, being creative and having fun and not being tied down to a recipe is pretty much the only way I wanna bake or cook. I can't stand recipes, even the ones I wrote myself. I don't follow them. I do this, I have a base, and then I change it up whatever way my heart tells me to. With that said, there's little tips and tricks that you can follow to make it so that when you make these changes, we don't have a big mess on our hands. And so that's the point of the group. All right, so I have my 510 grams of flour and 325 grams of water in my bowl. And then I measured my sea salt and my yeast. Okay, if you are using active dry yeast, you're gonna wanna save 50 grams of water to mix your yeast with so that it can activate for when we put this into the dough, okay? But if you're using instant yeast or bread machine yeast, you don't need to do that. And that's why I like it. So I use, and I'll show you which one I use. Okay, I use this one. Doesn't have any bioengineered stuff in it, and it works very well for me. I actually got like a 20 box of these. Okay, so we're gonna turn our mixer on. If you're doing this by hand, what I recommend you use is a Danish dough whisk, okay? So I'm gonna mix this for a few minutes just to get it to come together, okay? And the amount of time that you mix your dough or knead it with your Danish dough whisk is really dependent upon you, upon what type of mixer you're using. So if you're using a KitchenAid mixer, the recommendation, I believe, is no more than 2 minutes of kneading, and then you have to let the machine rest before doing another 2 minutes, and that's all they recommend. So our dough has come together, and I want to show you that. So 40 seconds in, and we have this dough that has come together. And this is what it looks like, okay? Can you see? We would call this rough, and it doesn't have any stretch to it whatsoever, and it's a little on the sticky side. okay? This is not ready for anything. It will make terrible bread if you were to go further from here. So what we need to do is let the flour absorb the liquid. If you're doing by hand, you would benefit from anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour of a rest after mixing with your Danish dough hook for a few minutes. And I like this analogy. I'm actually gonna do it in person so you can see. So if I have a cup of water, all right, and I take salt, I'm gonna take a spoonful of salt and put it into the water. What do we see? Can you see how only a small amount of the salt actually dissolved, but all the crystals are here at the bottom? If I wanted this to dissolve fully, I could leave it here to sit until all the hydrogen and oxygen, right, all the water molecules come in contact with all the salt molecules and it fully dissolves. Or if I wanted to speed up that meeting of the molecules, I would stir, okay? So this is how I speed up my, we call it an autolyse, or I call it an autolyse because I'm not a fan of pronouncing things correctly. So I just stirred this, and now much more of the salt has absorbed, and there's only a teeny tiny amount down here in the center that has not dissolved. So can you speed up the amount of time that you autolyse or autolyze by mixing, if your mixer can handle it, or if your muscles and your body can handle mixing? Absolutely. It's going to go much faster. During that rest period, you let your machine work for you. And I like to call this like a mixing autolyse because it really does speed it up, okay? So the highest my mixer goes for a dough hook, and you need to look at your mixer to see what the rules are for different attachments, is 6. So I can just let this go and let it continue to mix, and it's going to absorb the liquid much faster than if I just let it sit here and don't mix it. So that's what I do. I don't know if that makes sense, and if you guys want to comment or share if you've made anything, feel free to let me know. I don't want to ramble on and on, but sometimes I do. And with a dough that has this low of a hydration, and I'm going to pause here for a minute and explain what is hydration. Hydration is how much water you have in comparison to the flour. So anytime we make bread, the amount of flour that we use is considered 100%. And if we use the exact same amount of water as we do flour, that would be 100% hydration because we use the same amount. But if we use half of that, then we have a 50% hydration. And mine is this base, I don't know what the echo, what is 325 divided by 510?
0.6373.
So I'm at 64% hydration, and that's very low. You're not gonna see that. Most of the recipes out there for super soft sandwich bread and all that, that's not what we're making today. That's a higher hydration. They're usually somewhere in like the 70% range. But the reason I start low like this, especially for the base, is because you're going to have a much greater success converting this into super soft rolls or cinnamon rolls or whatever if you start with a lower hydration. Hi, Demi! And so I start lower so you can get a really good feel for what this dough is like, and then compare it. So if we make another batch later and we add oil and honey, right, like the majority of people are putting in their breads, the dough is going to change significantly. And that's why I like to start low like this. Yeah, your breads are 74%, right around there. I get that. My favorite bread is right around 95% hydration, and I never make the sandwich bread anymore. I'm only doing this today for you guys because we have to start somewhere, right? And so when we do bread classes locally, I do this. I add Udane. If you look in the group files, not in the files, in the posts, I have where there's a post. What can you add to the basic bread dough to make a softer and a sturdier bread? And there are many options. We'll cover those more in another day. What I will almost always add to this basic dough is vitamin C. At the very least, I will add 1/8 teaspoon of vitamin C powder ascorbic acid, okay? Or more recently, what I've been doing is 10 grams of lemon juice, and that comes out to be about a quarter of a lemon. I've pretty consistently gotten 40 grams out of one lemon when squeezing all the way. So, the vitamin C is really going to help soften the bread. It'll help extend the shelf life a bit. But what I noticed is the vitamin C helps make your bread more bendy. It is able to bend in half and recover better. And for that reason, I don't like to leave it out. All right, so I've mixed for 4 minutes and 45 seconds, plus the other 40, so about 5 minutes. And now we're gonna take a look at how the dough has changed. Okay, can you see that now the dough is a little less rough, but look, now it has some stretch to it, yet still it breaks. I'm just gonna turn this a little bit. Okay, all right, so this dough is not ready yet. We can let it rest for a few other minutes and then come back. So I'm gonna pretend that if you guys are making this with me, maybe some of you are doing it by hand. Maybe some of you are using a KitchenAid or another mixer that maybe isn't strong enough. And so I'm gonna let this dough rest for another 15 or 30 minutes just so you can see how it changes. And I'll come back on and do a live and finish the rest of the recipe. Note, I have not added my yeast or my salt, which will tighten up this dough quite a bit, and it's already pretty tight. Okay, so I'm just gonna put this in my mixer bowl and cover it. If I have I hope that won't fit, but we'll just put it right over the dough itself. Okay, I don't wanna just ramble for 15 or 30 minutes or whatever and waste your time. So I'm gonna try to do these as short as possible and then maybe merge them together into a video and post it on my YouTube or something. I'll see you guys in a bit. And in the meantime, if you want to get started, go right ahead. And this is just the base that's posted in the group. And then we can make bread together, and that's more fun. Okay, our dough's been resting for, I don't know how long, maybe 15 minutes. We're going to remove the lid. It was rising in a warm place, and you can see that it's bigger than it was before. So how do we know how long to let our dough rise? Well, we use what's called the poke test. And this is especially important with a wetter dough, is that you're gonna wanna wet your finger before you poke it into the dough so it doesn't stick. And you're gonna push it in there up to the first knuckle and then let it come back. And honestly, I think to the first knuckle is quite a bit because there is our hole, okay? But you can press in on the dough and you can see that this is starting to come back, but very slowly. And our dough has almost doubled. This could be ready to shape. If the dough, when you push into it, comes right back out or comes out rather quickly, then it will need to rest for longer. If you push your finger into the dough and everything else around it kind of collapses or goes inward, that means you've let your dough rest too long and it's overproofed. That means get moving on your shaping, and you may not need to let your dough rise as long for the second rise. Shaping our bread dough, we're gonna put it out onto the board. If you are using a dough with a lot more water in it, you're gonna need to either oil, well, you'd like to oil your board. So we can stretch this dough out some, okay? This dough is still a little tougher to work with. Again, it would make really great soft pretzels or even bagels, but we are gonna make this into bread so you can see just how different it is from refined flour bread with the exact same recipe. I have adjusted the recipe for how much extra water this dough takes, and even so, the dough is just completely different. Because it's not a sticky dough, I can just roll it out, just like this. Okay. All right. And then we can fold the dough in half or in thirds, just like that. And keep in mind, how long is your bread pan? What's the final shape that you want your dough to be in? I'm using a Lodge 8.5 by 4.5 pan. And so this is about the width of the pan. And you want to roll it somewhat tight. Okay. You can pinch the dough, get that seam there on the bottom. If you want to pinch the ends, you can, but I kind of like that. It's cute. And then if you have any doubts about how much air is in your dough, you can just slam it down on the counter to make sure you get any air out. If you're using an extra virgin olive oil from the store, it might stick. I don't know what they're putting in there that it sticks, but the bread doesn't stick when I use the Casadrinos. Coated in the oil, and then gently place the dough into the pan and cover it so it doesn't lose any more moisture. Preheat your oven to baking temperature. I'm going to use 420 degrees today because this is a lean dough with no fat and no sugar. By the time this is done rising on top of the stove, it will be ready to go. Okay, my bread has risen. The oven has preheated to 420 degrees. We can do the finger poke test again. Push our finger in, and you can see that it's remaining pressed in. The rest of the loaf did not sink. It's not coming back out again. This is ready to bake. Place your dough in the oven and close the door. I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes and then check the temperature of the dough. It's been another 10 minutes. I covered my loaf with foil so the top wouldn't burn. And we're going to check the temperature right in the absolute middle, which means right there. Okay. 187. We are very close. 189, 191. Boom! There it is. Let's take it out. Anything over 190 for a lean dough is done. So our bread has just been removed from the oven, and we see this little line here, the tear, right where the dough would have touched the pan. What that means is that the crust was already created before the bread was done rising, and so it expanded here instead of evenly throughout the loaf. So I could have let this bread rise a little bit longer. You can see that on the other side, that is not an issue, okay? This doesn't bother me too much, but if it bothers you, you just want to go a little bit longer on your rise. So to take this out of the loaf pan, I'm going to use 2 pot holders, and I'm very gently going to tip it out. We do not want to be rough with our dough when we take it out of the oven because the crumb has not fully solidified. It's still very fragile inside. Here's our pretty little loaf. And now we're going to let this cool on the baking rack. Basic loaf is warm to the touch, but not hot. So I'm going to slice a piece. I always slice an end and then another one to show you what it's really like. Okay, this is our bread. It is soft. Well, you can bend it in half. It's gonna hold up. Not bad, right? This is because of the rest. Here's our crumb. I hope I'm holding this. Here's our crumb. Okay. It's soft. bendy. We have a nice even distribution of the crumb. It's gonna be delicious. But on day 2 or day 3 even, this will be very dry and maybe even a little crumbly, although it is not crumbly right now. This was with no additives, no vitamin C, no udane, no lecithin, no vital wheat gluten, nothing. Just flour, water, salt, and yeast. And it turned out very nice, even for a low hydration dough. If you started here and this was all that you made, it would be a good bread. But it's not the same as taking your refined flour bread, which is pretty much all starch and gluten, right? It's just gonna rise like the dickens and be super soft and pillowy. But with this, the trade-off is the vitamins, the minerals, the extra protein. Again, our soft, finished bread that does bend in half, but tomorrow or the next day, that will not be the case. That said, it spreads very nicely with butter, and this will hold up to a sandwich. It's a great beginner loaf, especially if you're kneading by hand. And it's delicious.